Today I want to talk about branding on Substack, not Substack's brand itself, which would be interesting to maybe cover another day, but instead writer branding on Substack. So anyone who has started a Substack knows that you are prompted to customize different aspects of your newsletter, such as the about. You can upload a logo. You can even change colors. I think there are a few font options. And I find it really interesting because when you are starting a Substack, you don't necessarily think, oh, I need to create a visual identity for a brand. But once you hit start, that does go through your mind. And you're like, oh, all of a sudden I need to think about this. Let's start by looking at what Substack suggests for visual branding. Substack provides a blog post to its writers on Substack Grow, which is in their resource hub, building a home for your publication. So they say defining a brand identity. Brand design elements like logos and headers communicate an overarching message to readers about what to expect. So they give a few prompts that are basic questions to think about with your goals. Designing a reader journey. So that's kind of like your customer journey. It's funny because it's a bit of like marketing in a little nutshell. So they include some elements of formatting. Here's an interesting one, create consistent naming conventions. They talk about doing consistent imagery. Okay, they have an example here of someone who runs Above the Fold, a Substack about dumplings and the people who make them. So she said, make visuals work in lockstep with words to further storytelling, making the verbal and visual identities match. Nod to the newspaper and editorial reference of Above the Fold, and showcase dumplings visually without a photo budget. That one's interesting because I've worked with apps and technology where it's a lot harder to display the brand visually. You have to get a lot more creative, and that reminds me of that. If you don't have a chance to take photos all the time, how do you represent that visually? Sometimes it's choosing a certain style of stock images. Usually a really talented visual identity designer will help aid there and give direction. So she even worked with a designer to create a toolkit and then used Canva. So she did outsource doing her visual identity. I wonder what hers looks like. Let's take a look. Above the Fold. Oh yeah, they use like cute little illustrations. The designer probably did those. She has a color scheme. You can definitely tell this has a more it looks like a designer helped with this visual identity. They say here are the ways you can design your Substack post and site: logo and cover image, publication theme, layouts, colors and fonts, homepage links, publication sections and logos. And then within the emails, your email banner, post preview images, other images and banners. So it is quite a lot to think about when you're like, I'm just going to jot something off. The brands on Substack really are sub-brands of the writers. And so you'll see that the visual identity on their Substack is probably different than what is the visual identity or the brand identity on their website. I want to start with two that are some of my favorite Substacks that I both pay for. So let's start with Alison Roman. So this is the little home screen you see when you first go to a publication that you don't subscribe to. So it's the sort of landing page. And so she has lifestyle imagery here, probably from a photo shoot she did. And I always found the name of her publication really funny. It's A Newsletter, which I think represents her well because she has this sort of wit, like drier humor, very plain spoken, very tell it like it is. And the name represents that by just being as simple as it gets, a newsletter. Recipe, stories, and solicited advice. Again, it's very like shortened to the point. And then if we take a look at the newsletter itself, she uses this orange color. No, actually, I think this orange color is just the Substack orange. She hasn't changed that, but I want to show her logo. Yeah, I guess the orange is the same. It's very similar to the Substack orange. She uses this bright orange color. She has her own fonts that she's picked out. Someone clearly designed this. And she always has these food photos as the hero images, which I believe are from photo shoots. Or maybe she takes them herself, but they're like high quality photos. She also has a YouTube channel. And so if you look at her YouTube channel, it looks like it has its own branding because it's a separate sub-brand called Home Movies. But she continues the orange color. I believe that's on her site as well. Are the fonts the same? I believe the fonts carry over. Yeah, fonts carry over as well. So that's how she sort of distinguished these sub-brands. They have different names: Home Movies, a newsletter, but the colors and the fonts stay the same throughout. I want to look at another one of my favorites, which is Haley Nahman's Maybe Baby newsletter. She also has this fun orange color. That must be a design trend, but I also really like a bright orange or pink or yellow, these warm colors. So she has this really cute logo. I've never noticed these testimonials that you can pull on your landing page. She has this, it almost looks more handwritten. It might be hand drawn, the type. I'm not a type expert. I'm not a visual identity expert. Chipping away at the inscrutability of modern life, popular culture, and how we feel about both. You have to have this little quick about or value proposition in the way that you would need to when you're writing it for a brand or product. Oh, so this is another little logo she has. This is for the podcast. It's just for paid subscribers. The little baby with the earphones on. This is new, the Dear Baby, which is her advice column. I've never noticed this separate logo. Different color, different hand lettering. Otherwise, it's a mix of casual photos. It's not a distinct visual style. But she does have specific content buckets. Next, I want to look at Downtime, which is the new iteration of Girls' Night In. I thought this would be an interesting one to look at because Girls' Night In was a bigger media brand where they even had a parent company with offshoots like Wild, which was their, they had puzzles and home goods brand. And so they are coming from this place where they've already been thinking about brand, but they've recently pared back Girls' Night In and shifted it to Substack. And now it's just Alisha Ramos doing Downtime. So I thought they would have an interesting approach to branding. So if you look at it, it looks like they're using some different colors. I think this is more of a cream color in the background. They have this little logo, which if you knew Girls' Night In, I believe they have a new logo, which is different than the past Girls' Night In branding. It's this sort of retro 70s-ish. They also changed the name from Girls' Night In to Downtime, which is interesting. It was supposed to be a slight shift in what they were covering. So anytime there's a name change, that's interesting. They have this sort of collage-y visual style, but otherwise it's not particularly consistent. It looks like they maybe have a few colors that they've picked out. They've made headers to include with a different font. So they've clearly done a light visual identity and have named their section. Actually, the Downtime branding reminds me a lot of the branding for Great Jones and Our Place, the two cookware companies. They also have this sort of homey 70s, little bit retro feel. A very popular newsletter in the startup world is Lenny's newsletter. So when you land on his, it's a very simple. It just has this little fire illustration. Lenny's newsletter is very straightforward. It's very straight to the point and super full of content about product. So he's probably trying to be I'm serious and not make it too cutesy or branded. He does have a visual identity though. He has these sort of little illustrations that go with his pieces. He does have a cover for his podcast. The little illustrations change depending on the format, community wisdom. So even though it's very straightforward, he still does have consistent branding. It's not just content. Another one that reminds me of Lenny's newsletter is How They Grow, which is another growth marketing product newsletter, very chock full of information. He has a bit more of a stronger visual identity here. He uses this really cute little illustration of the plant, which is funny because it's similar to the little illustration Lenny uses of the fire, just different metaphors. He always has this sort of style, this cover. He has a few different content series, Why They Died versus How They Grow, and he has a different visual identity for each of those series. Why They Died is a bit more playful. How They Grow is a bit more straightforward. He also has these 5-Bit Fridays, which you'll see has its own branding of the watering can. 5-Bit, I think it's supposed to be a play on video games, which is why it has that sort of retro 80s font. Another newsletter I like is Things Worth Knowing with Farrah Storr. And when you look at hers, it's funny because she comes from a women's media background, I believe, print magazine. And it looks a bit like that. Like you get that feeling that you're going to be reading like a women's magazine. And even the imagery here, it feels a bit like when you open up like a Glamour, or here she must have been at Cosmopolitan. It feels a little bit like that, the imagery. And she must be using like stock images, but it has that bit of feel of reading a magazine, even though they barely exist anymore. Let's look at Elizabeth Holmes, aka So Many Thoughts. Not the Elizabeth Holmes you are thinking of. This is a different Elizabeth Holmes. She covers the royals in the UK. It's just her headshot. So Many Thoughts, I believe, is her Instagram. I don't know if it started with an Instagram or it started with a Substack. I find the name interesting because it doesn't convey anything to do with what she really talks about. She's famous for doing these where she takes a photo of what the royals are wearing, and then she has like all these little thoughts written over them on Instagram stories, dissecting the outfits, what they mean. And so it does relate to that specific content, but I feel like it doesn't really capture like that she covers like royals and fashion in terms of like history and what it means. So I wonder if it just started off as like that series, and then because it became well known, she made the name. That would be interesting to know, because I doubt that she made the name and then like made this whole sort of like mini media brand under her. Not even mini. I think this is her full job. I wanted to show her logo, which is this very elegant blue, light blue with the cursive, which I think does capture what she's covering a lot better, this high-end, elevated, historic fashion. And here she uses a bit of a visual identity. Again, this blue, this very classic, elegant font. If you want to think about more elevated, let's look at Ruth Reichl. Was the editor-in-chief of Gourmet magazine and now has a newsletter about cooking. So she is a bit more old school. She covers high-end, but like homey. It's sort of like Ruth Reichl to food is like when you think about like a Nancy Meyer's kitchen. That's what I think of when I think about her writing and what she covers. So she has this more understated bluish, grayish. It looks almost more like a book, her header image here. Oh, her logo is also this sort of like cursive. I think the logo is maybe her signature. She uses this dark navy blue, a very classic font. Another newsletter I love is Mari Andrews, who is a writer and artist. She has a distinct visual style from her own illustrations. She uses a lot of watercolor, so this must be her own watercolor. The description is exploring life's full range of colors, so you see a lot of colors here within her watercolor. She uses watercolor in almost every newsletter. It's very like dreamy, natural, creative. A lot of things she writes about. She writes a lot about life, creativity, being introspective. One publication with a very distinct visual identity is Blackbird Spyplane. Actually, not just visual identity, but brand identity. If you think about the way that he and his partner write, it's a bit like gonzo is the way I would describe it. You'll see they have this very like 90s internet clip art influence, mixing a lot of font. It's not overly clean, but he does stay consistent even with playing around with it. So even though you're like, oh my God, they just opened up Paint and put like everything on there, it does stay really consistent. I'd be so curious to know if they have like any sort of visual guidelines that they follow, because it does stay on brand. It's not like every time you're like, oh, that doesn't look like Blackbird Spyplane. It looks like Blackbird Spyplane. And their style of writing is also very, I would have to have a think about how you even describe this tone of voice. It must be his tone of voice. But you'll see here like the 35 slappiest shops across the Spyplane universe. Like, what is a slappy shop? Should I know what that is? Another newsletter I love is The Unpublishable by Jessica DeFino. It breaks down the beauty industry. The name is Unpublishable, which I think captures it well. It implies that you're going to see stuff that is not talked about, that maybe goes against mainstream consumer culture. She has this old art of a woman looking shocked, which I think is great because she ties in so much cultural trends and history over time and connects the beauty industry and what's going on in the modern day-to-day to this more like macro lens of beauty and women and feminism. I want to look at Link in Bio by Rachel Karten because she just redid her visual identity. So she clearly put some thought into it and probably hired some outside help. Link in bio is a great name because she covers social media, working in social media. It's basically aimed at social media marketing managers. And everyone knows link in bio. It's a very insidery term that has become, I guess, not insidery. Everyone knows what it means. This visual identity, it's very like, it feels very like Gen Z to me, very young, which is good because that's what a lot is happening in social now is around, social's always been around youth, right? I said the logo looked kind of like futuristic Gen Z, but it also has this sort of like retro tech feel, which you can see here by using this imagery where it combines sort of modern with retro computer. Yeah, this feels very like a lot of trends you're seeing with like the sort of fresh, young Gen Z oriented brands. This is sort of like, it feels very like circa 2000. Like, okay. Similar to Rachel Karten's Link in Bio's After School by Casey Lewis, this is also sort of like trend. I think it's oriented towards Gen Z, trends in youth culture analysis. So they also have this sort of gradient. A lot of these colors are being used in Gen Z. After School is a fun name because it implies youth culture, but that it's not talking about education, obviously. It's kind of a fun identity to go with too because you can play around a lot with it, like their series After School Daily and After School Extra Credit. There's a lot of wordplay you could do there. They keep this very consistent background, even though they're changing up the images, which helps to make things look consistent. But it definitely feels like it's in trend with a lot of that Gen Z branding. I asked people for a few suggestions of Substacks they like, so we can do a little bit of a lightning round here. Fighting Talk by Ettie Bailey King, inclusive, accessible communication made simple. So she has a very straightforward visual identity here. Again, this is sort of orange. I wonder why. Is it because it's the Substack orange? But I do like that color. So it's a lot about accessibility. Looks like she uses photos of herself and then also whatever is going on in the newsletter. So pretty straightforward. This is a good example of one where you don't have to like overthink it if you're just trying to launch your own newsletter to support your work. It has an image of her, which is great because then people will, if it's related to her work, it has a great name that has to do with what she's doing, which is advocating for more inclusive communication. And it has a color scheme, but otherwise it isn't like overly done. So I think that's a good example if you're trying to start your own and you're not really sure or you want to wait to like do a bigger, larger scale identity. Someone recommended Anxious Chatter by Mollie. This is a good example of just using a cute little illustration. It seems like it's maybe like a more personal one. This feels definitely more like blog-like from back in the day. So it feels more intimate. It doesn't feel like overly done also. Similarly, Bad at Keeping Secrets, Emotional Messes and Intimate Conversations. So this is, again, sort of more blog-like. What's interesting because the illustration on the About page, if I just popped up on that, I don't know if this would necessarily match to me, but she does have all these cute little illustrations. She must do these. I think it's more this image that's throwing me off because this image is like, I don't know if this is bad, but it makes me think like mommy blog, which is not a bad thing, but it's very different to all of these cute little illustrations that she does, which are very consistent. Someone else recommended The Clearing by Katherine May. So everything I know about Katherine May is that she's written The Wintering, that book, and then I think she wrote one about like astonishment or something like that recently. So yeah, it says a newsletter and community for wild minds, winters, and enchantment seekers. Oh, she wrote about enchantment. You do get that feeling with this illustration and that font that it's like, I get like cozy. That's the feeling I get. And it has these blues, which makes you think of winter as well. It looks like she just kind of goes between this series for her podcast and these illustrations. I don't really think that cover matches this blue, or not matches, but I don't really think it goes with these sort of cozy illustrations very well. That orange again. I was also recommended The Shoulds. This is a good example of one where they've really thought about color, and this almost feels like you're landing on a media site because it's more custom. They have this like very consistent, even within the stock images, they have this very consistent visual branding. Another one sent to me that I think is a good example of less is more is this Monday. It's about a weekly newsletter on creativity and attention. So they just have this cute little illustration logo, and than this lavender color. But otherwise, it's a bunch of photos. I don't know if they've taken these photos, but they also look like they could maybe be like film photos. They match visually, but they are somewhat simple. So it's something that looks very cohesive, but they haven't necessarily overdone it. We could look at a million more of these all day. Because Substack has grown so much, you see more and more people on it, and that's when you start to see these trends emerge in branding. And it's because it's usually smaller projects or people doing it on their own. They're not thinking, oh, I'm launching a company. Even though in a lot of ways, some of these writers, they are getting their full living from these. They are maybe going towards brand identities that they haven't like necessarily put like a lot of investment in, although maybe they have, maybe some of them have. I would bet, like, for example, Alison Roman did a decent investment when she launched hers. But, you know, it's not like these companies that are expecting to scale, who are like VC backed and doing a whole brand identity with like a high-end agency. I doubt most of these people are doing that. They probably have a designer friend who did it and they came up with the name. But it's helpful to see how even with projects like this, having a consistent brand identity can really change how you interpret what the content is, how you interact with it. Do you use illustrations? Do you use photos? Do you have colors? Do you have fonts you use? These are things that people probably don't think about when they're thinking, oh, I want to start a newsletter or Substack. Because probably when you launch on other platforms, I'm not sure about this, but they probably have more templates, or you can go like buy templates, email templates. I don't think anyone is making like Substack visual templates, which is very interesting to think about, right? Because when you do a Squarespace site or a Wix, there are templates available. I'm curious if Substack would ever do that, but their main focus is on getting people writing. But I know when I've launched my own Substacks, that's been like a bit of like a trip up. I'd be like, oh, I have to make a logo. One time I just like made one on Canva and I didn't even really like it that much. But I was like, I just need to get something out there and I don't really care that much. But if I was trying to like actually make it more of a thing where I was doing paid subscribers or posting more consistently, I would definitely want to get some more thought out help with that. I could see how people who maybe are not so good at naming or aren't used to thinking about like content and content buckets, how it would be helpful to get someone's thoughts on, you know, things that can grow with you and you may not have to like change the name every so often, but that still cover what you're doing. Anyway, I think it's interesting and not really talked about, but something people are doing all the time. It's like your visual style with the photos, what you want to name it, how you describe it. That's a huge part of branding is the description and getting that right and striking the right tone that captures your voice and what you're covering. I think that's what's interesting to me is that a lot of Substack branding is writer branding, but it is a sub-brand of the person writing it. Anyway, let me know what you think. Am I overthinking Substack branding? Do you have thoughts on it? Are there things you like? I would like to see someone do more like really out there approach like Blackbird Spyplane. If you know any like that, I would love to see it. Okay, thanks. Bye.